God, Country, Notre Dame. Not just a lofty motto etched in stone at the Basilica, a Notre Dame tradition of military service that runs deep. From Father Corby's chaplain duties in the Civil War, to the Navy taking over the campus in World War II for officers training, many sons and daughters of Notre Dame have and continue to serve around the globe. God, Country, Notre Dame, and Veterans, a conversation with 4 Notre Dame veterans on their service and its connection to their Notre Dame experience. Former Air Force General Frank Taylor, class of 70. Former Navy Captain Jack Samar, class of 71. Former Army Colonel DJ Reyes, class of 79. Air Force Major Amanda Kipley, class of 08. I'm former Marine Captain Mike Saray, class of 69. Retired Air Force General Frank Taylor, class of 70. Thank you for joining us today for this Veterans Tribute.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate the invitation. Look forward to it.
How about your military connection? You were in ROTC at Notre Dame while you were attending there, but your family, did your family have a military tradition, and was it somewhat preordained that you'd have a military career?
Not in any way preordained. My mother's brothers and my father and his brothers served in World War II, had this most able-bodied American men, and in Korea. But there was no long-standing military tradition in our house. If I kind of reflect back on the 50s, it was after the Korean conflict. There were several combat movies like Vic Morrow on Combat and 12 O'Clock High, and there was a show called West Point that really intrigued me when I was 9 or 10 years old, and that's really what motivated me to want to be a part of the military, were those shows and the idea of perhaps getting to West Point and becoming an Army officer.
Those images and perceptions of veterans growing up as a young man, have they changed over the years for you?
They haven't changed. I mean, the reason I thought the military was such an honorable profession was because we were doing honorable things. And the idea of service to the nation, sacrifice, and those sorts of things have really been kind of the bellwether of my journey through life and through the military and through other sorts of things. So the values were very consistent with what I wanted to be moving forward. The interesting thing about Notre Dame is, over the course of my undergraduate tenure there, that was the height of the Vietnam War. We still wore uniforms on campus. We had parades and military functions and that sort of thing. So it wasn't a place that was hostile to the military, although there were elements that wanted to end the war. It never became a personal attack on the individual in uniform, more about the concept of the fighting in Vietnam.
Frank, what was it like to be serving in the 70s and the 80s, that kind of long grind after the Vietnam War, when the military wasn't that popular, wasn't being that funded, and in many ways not as respected as it once was? Did that have any personal repercussions on you as you were going through?
Not so much personal repercussions. You know, the challenge in any military environment is taking care of the troops and getting the mission done. And I served in Turkey in 76. I was in Washington from 77 to 78. I served in our personnel organization, personnel outfit of my organization. So for me, it was continuing a career. Whether that career was popular or not popular, I was focused on developing myself as an Air Force officer, doing what I needed to do to demonstrate, the leadership development and those sorts of things that were going to be important for the future.
As you mentioned, when we were growing up, there was a tradition of the military in our families and in society. And now today we talk about the 1%, the other 1%, the only 1% who are actively serving in the country or who have served in the country. Does that surprise you? And does that bode well for the country?
Well, look, I think the all-volunteer force was the right decision. The quality of the force has never been better, the consistency of the recruits and that sort of thing. But what it does do is take away from the 99% the opportunity to understand service to our country, service to our fellow man, people that don't necessarily grow up where you grew up, but you get to meet them and you get to see them and you get to understand the great quilt patchwork of what is America today. So I think it's great for the military, but not necessarily for every other citizen who I believe should serve in some way the nation and community to give back for the benefits of living in our great democracy.
Since 9/11, there's been a real resurgence in the respect and recognition of military people. Do you think that's genuine, or do you think it's just a sign of the times? And do you get a sense that sometimes there might be a bit of false patriotism there?
Well, I think there's a little bit of all of that. But by and large, I think Americans appreciate the work that the U.S. military has done, certainly since 9/11, in protecting our country from what happened to us on 9/11. And that respect is genuine. There are others who sometimes I call them false patriots. They'll say, thank you for your service, and turn around and do something that is inconsistent with what being a true American patriot is all about. But they are few and far between. So I think it is genuine. And I think American business has stepped up to recognize service and sacrifice of American military members, and have offered discounts and all sorts of other things as some small payment for their service and sacrifice. So I think it's real. We just have to sustain it.
After your military career, a very distinguished one at that, you served with the State Department, working in counterterrorism, whatever, had a chance to represent the United States abroad. What's their perspective from abroad, looking at us as Americans and you as a former military man?
Well, look, I found our foreign allies and saw America as a beacon of strength, of leadership. And I think that remains the most important ingredient that we bring to the international community. Lead with moral courage and take on the toughest human rights and other issues that impact the world, where the least of us is not treated in a fair way. And I think that's what generally our foreign partners see in us. And so as the U.S. ambassador for counterterrorism, there was no question that people were going to join our coalition, that they were going to take on terrorism. They were going to do so in a systematic way with American leadership that was clear in terms of what we were trying to accomplish.
Frank, are you surprised at all about how much more recognized military leaders are in this country, not just in the military and their work in the military, but their overall leadership in government, corporate worlds, nonprofits, society in general?
Doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, it's the nature of how we train our military leaders. That's NCO leaders and officer leaders, to take charge, to be responsible, and to execute. And so what I found extraordinarily interesting is the number of post-military opportunities that have been created for guys like me, who served a full career, got asked to do things I never thought I'd be able to do. Yet my military time was preparation for the leadership and responsibilities of those jobs, be it in the Counterterrorism Bureau, at the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, at the General Electric Company. Someone asked me, what's the difference between the private sector and the military? I said, there's really no difference. It's still a mission to get accomplished. The nature of which, or how you do that, may be a little bit different depending on the cultural environment that you're operating in. But the skills that are necessary to execute a mission translate very nicely from the military into diplomacy, into the private sector.
I can't recall when I was at Notre Dame in the late 60s that there were any veterans on campus. And now the university has a very robust veterans program where they're really recruiting and making it more easier for veterans to go to school. How do you, and you go back to, you teach back at Notre Dame now, do you see that dynamic playing out?
Look, I think it's an opportunity to strengthen the student body of Notre Dame, to bring people with real world experiences to campus, to share those experiences with students. In fact, I'm an adjunct professor at the Keough School, and part of my responsibility is to translate my years of experience in government into information, knowledge, discussion with our students about how to prepare for the future. So I think it's a rich source of great talent, great experiences that enhance the quality of the student body and the things that they experience with their Notre Dame education.
The God Country Notre Dame stonework above the east entrance to the Basilica. Were you aware of that, or do you think it was kind of the state of mind of the university?
I was aware of it. I don't know that it was clear to all of us who were students there that Notre Dame's relationship and commitment to the military had gone back so far. I didn't learn that lesson until many years after leaving the university, but it certainly, through Father Hesburgh, has proven to be the right credo, that God, country, and Notre Dame are the three most important elements of how we think about protecting our country and our way of life.
Well, Air Force General Frank Taylor, class of 70, thank you for participating in this Notre Dame Alumni Association's tribute to veterans this week.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Go Irish.
Navy Captain Jack Samar, class of 71. Welcome, Jack. Nice to meet you.
Very nice meeting you, Mike. Glad to be here.
What was your first reference point for veterans as a young man growing up?
I grew up in a house where my father was a retired World War II veteran. He spent his entire time in the Pacific. He made all the way up to Petty Officer First Class. And I grew up in Gary, Indiana. It was a much different city than it is now, but we had parades, we had people marching. Come to the holidays, the 4th of July, Memorial Day, Veterans Day, and we always had veterans out there marching, as well as the local National Guard. My father was a veteran he had joined the VFW and the American Legion, of which after I retired, I joined both of those also.
So Jack, you've grown up on many Veterans Days, celebrating since your earliest days as a young man, I assume.
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. That's about the best way of saying it.
And how did it shape your decision or influence your decision to make the military your career?
I was one of these odd kids that at an early age, I kind of knew what I wanted to do. And that was to become a naval officer. Don't know how, don't know why. Maybe it was just the pride in watching those parades and watching the flag, getting goosebumps. But
so with your father and your uncle being Navy veterans, it was pretty much providence that you would become a naval officer and serve yourself as a career in the military.
Yes, it was. The career became basically a secondary, and I'll be honest, my mother thought I'd get out after a few years and go to law school, but I can't think of a better place to grow up and mature in than being in the service. Probably the highest responsibility one could have in any service, whether it be in the military or any kind of service, is responsibility for the lives of others. And that became my thing. I flew for 20 years in the Navy, and then later on had command of 2 ships. And
So what was it like being at Notre Dame and Naval ROTC's 1967-71? I overlapped a few years myself, and Notre Dame was going through some changes, as was much of the country. How did that affect you?
It's interesting. I never considered Notre Dame or my time there to be, to use today's vernacular, liberal. I think back and, there were some speeches, there were some protests, but at the time it was 7,000 guys, 8,000 guys. And out of that, maybe any of these demonstrations were 200 to 300. I can remember probably the draft when the lottery came up. That was the big thing in the campus for us during my time frame. That occurred in my junior year, and I lived with 3 engineers. I was a political science major. I was also on the track team, but my number ended up becoming 342. I can remember, some protests and things that occurred, but they weren't something that as in today, it took everything over. There were things that happened. I can remember, I think it was my freshman or sophomore year, there was a protest during the spring pass and review, and a bunch of protesters decided to lay down in the middle of the field. Well, all the ROTC units were marching and they moved us around and we just went around. But, that was a minor one.
Jack, let me ask you, you had a distinguished career over 20 years, mostly as a naval aviator, but you were also a commander of some ships. But you served mostly at the end of the Vietnam War and in the post-Vietnam War era. Because of that, how did the reference point change on veterans for the country, if not yourself, during that period?
Well, from my own personal, I spent 30 years graduated in 71, was commissioned, went to Naval Flight School, became a naval flight officer. I flew A6s. I was on USS Midway. We were the last carrier to go up in the Tonkin Gulf. I was one of these odd guys. I loved my uniform. I wore it most places. We took some heat back then. I got yelled at here in the States going through an airport. I got nothing more than getting yelled at. I'll just say it that way. Never pushed, never spit on like some of the other veterans. But the country didn't appreciate what was being done by the people, by our military over there. They may have understood it, but they understood it from a negative standpoint. I watched all that go through many years. I watched the years after Vietnam, where the budget really hurt the military. We had enlisted people who were living on food stamps. It wasn't until the Reagan years that things actually changed. Military started getting a lot more vibrant. They were being funded. We were doing things. And you could sense it when you walked around and saw how you were being treated. After the Reagan years, it was almost a pride to wear a uniform. And then it really took a jump. 2 issues that came up. One I was part of was Desert Storm. When you came home from Desert Storm, everybody wanted to talk to you. Everybody wanted to see you. What did you do? How did what happened?
There's a whole new generation of veterans that have come of age now since 9/11 through 2 major wars. Do you feel that they're going to get a much different reception as veterans than you did because of the time when you served?
Yes, I do. I really do. I think you see that today with a number that are actually standing up and running for offices, both on the national level and on the local level. One of the first things they all state, if they've been in the service, they tell you they were in the service. They want to bond with other servicemen as well as, and I think it's not as well as, but they want to show the people that they've already served. They've given part of their life and they're willing to do it again.
Mhm. And Jack, what do you think about your family now? How are they carrying on this veteran tradition within the Samar family?
I've got 3 children. Oldest daughter went to St. Mary's. Number 2 daughter went to the Naval Academy. And I'll be honest with you, I watched her, and she was obviously a better ship driver than I ever was, but she was a damn good officer. She married somebody who was a class ahead of her. She is living in Hawaii right now, Pearl Harbor. He is the CO of a destroyer out in Pearl. So that's how we're kind of still getting back in service. And my son did not go into the military, but he's giving back every day as a police officer in Charlottesville.
That's quite nice. So, Jack, when Veterans Day rolls around, what particular observances do you kind of maintain? Is there a tradition that you have for Veterans Day?
I will be doing what I normally do, and that's fly my American flag. I fly an American flag, I'll say 80% of the time. One of the odd things that I would normally do, I've gone to a lot of military cemeteries and just wander around to look at the people who have given and sacrificed their life for this country. I've gone a couple of times to memorial service over at Arlington for the laying of the wreaths.
Well, thank you, Captain Jack Samar, for your service and for your thoughts on this Veterans Day. And I hope you have a good one come November 11th.
Well, I've always lived by the one comment or one phrase that we have there on the east door of the church of our basilica at Notre Dame: God, country, and Notre Dame. And that means a lot to me more than anything else.
All right. Thank you very much, Captain, and have a nice holiday.
You too, Mike. Take care.
Colonel DJ Reyes, thanks for joining us on this Veterans Day program. And what was your first reference of veterans as growing up as a young kid?
I grew up as a military dependent. For those of us who grow up as dependents, we like to call ourselves military brats. So my dad was a Korean War and Vietnam War combat veteran. He served for over 25 years. So my entire childhood, I was basically in the Army. And then I went to Notre Dame and got commissioned in the ROTC program.
So was there any doubt in your mind that you were going to make the military career, especially after you got a taste of it during ROTC at Notre Dame?
Well, I would say that I had an inclination to military service growing up as a military brat. But I'll be very frank with you. Financially, that was a big driver for me. And I knew that going into the Army, I could get a good job, I could a good profession, I would get solid benefits, and I could become an officer. And so I think those things combined drove me towards the military option.
And DJ, what about you served for over 30 years all around the world, mostly in the intelligence capacity? What have you observed over the years of how people's reactions to veterans and veterans themselves have changed over those 30 years?
Yeah, so my perspective started as a child, watching my father come back from Vietnam during his tours, and I was old enough to realize that there were some concerns in our nation with regards to the Vietnam War, and also sharing some stories with my father, telling me that he and his fellow soldiers weren't treated as welcoming when they came back from Vietnam. From that point on, and then when I joined the military and through my entire 3 decades of service, I've seen a great positive evolution of our nation and our citizens' positive attitudes towards our military. I think they've learned to distinguish between the politics of war and the men and women who have to fight the nation's wars. And even to some of my friends who may not necessarily agree with some political decisions for us going to war or being in conflict, I've never felt at any one time they've taken anything out on me or said anything negative to me or about the military. So I think the nation's really come around after the Vietnam War.
But now with the draft gone and less than 1% of the population serving in these last two wars, do you think that people get more disconnected to veterans, or do you think, in a strange way, they are more appreciative of what veterans are doing?
I would think that there is merit in having skin in the game. So especially for our elected political leaders, those who have served, who are veterans and now legislators, those who are legislators and who have children that are in the military service, I have to believe that they may have a little bit of a nuanced perspective and appreciation of the military and the serious nature of sending our women and men, our brothers and sisters, our sons and daughters off to conflict for the better interests of our nation, for our national security interests.
I think there was a time where they said almost 50% of the elected officials in Congress had some prior military experience, which is quite different now today.
Absolutely, and we're seeing that. But I know that there are there legislators up on Capitol Hill, in the federal government that have served. Many of them are current. They've served in the Iraq campaign and they've served in the Afghanistan campaign. And you often hear from those legislators as well. They're fairly vocal on this. So I think the veterans have a strong representative voice along with the various veteran service organizations nationwide.
DJ, you have a really unique perspective on veterans today because you're very much involved with this latest generation of veterans. You're running or administering these veterans courts in Florida and elsewhere to help veterans who run afoul of the law to get a little better chance of getting through the services. How do you characterize this generation of veterans compared to previous ones?
That is a great question. In many ways, I see our generation, my generation, very similar to past generations, your generation in the Vietnam War, and even those of my father in the Korean War, and even the greatest generation. I think attributes such as honor, loyalty, integrity, perseverance, all of those great qualities they teach you and they inculcate in you when you come into the military. I think those are all the same. They've never changed. But I also think that there is a little bit of a difference in that as far back as the greatest generation. I believe there was more, the perception of the culture then was more of I go to war, I do my job, I do my duty, I come back home, I pick up where I left off, and I just get on with business. You didn't hear much about folks complaining or, folks lamenting over issues or conditions. They dealt with it. As our society started evolving and with the growth of the media, which became instantaneous, real-time media, real-time coverage, and of course, just the whole politicization of many of the issues that we find today, I think that's changed a lot with the attitudes of many of, I would say, some of our veterans. Not in a bad way. I think that because there's more openness now and more of a willingness for people to talk and discuss about certain issues that are happening, whether they're physical issues that the veterans are facing, mental issues, drug-related issues, whatever the case may be, I think veterans now these days are more open, more conducive to talking about their problems and challenges and willing to share it. So I think that's kind of a difference now.
But compared to previous generations of veterans, do you think this current or this latest generation of veterans have any greater needs than any of us other generations had?
I think that one criteria really stands out to me, and that is through all of the wars in our nation's history, when you look at what we've been through now, the longest wars. I mean, we've been at Afghanistan for 20 years. That's the longest war. And then even, Iraq was 8 years or 9 years. Those are long wars. And I think just the longevity of continuous combat operations and veterans such as myself that have rotated multiple tours back into the Middle East for combat tours, I think that really played an impact an impact on us, psychologically, physically, mentally, even I dare say, even spiritually. And so I think that's one of the greatest challenges that we've faced.
But you see these veterans coming in these criminal courts, they've run afoul of the law, they've had some domestic problems, they've had traffic problems, they've had criminal problems, drug problems, whatever. If you were running a veterans court, let's say in the 50s, would you be seeing the same types of cases, do you think? Or do you think there's something unique to this generation?
I'll just take one disorder as an example: post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder today existed back in Vietnam. We called it, I believe, the 1,000-mile stare. We called it shell shock. It existed in the Korean War. It existed all the way back to the Civil War. They called it a soldier's heart. So the disorders and the disabilities were really there. It's just, I believe, the way we looked at things back then in our culture, and just the way we did things, back in the day. I think it's a little different than how we view things and how we deal with things now.
Is there anything that you do on every Veterans Day? Is there any tradition that you and your family have to honor veterans on Veterans Day?
Well, I will tell you that on every Veterans Day, and because of the Veterans Treatment Court that I'm involved in, we make it a point, all the judges who are veterans, and specifically the Veteran Treatment Court judges and the senior mentors of our program, we all meet together in South Tampa at the local IHOP early in the morning. And there's two reasons. One is for fellowship and to honor our veterans. But two, just as important, you get the red, white, and blue breakfast with the pancakes and your side of sausage or bacon, and it's free because they're honoring the veterans. So you can well imagine the veterans pack the IHOP, and there's a standing line outside before 7 o'clock in the morning.
Well, you look pretty trim. I don't think you've had a stack of pancakes since the South Dining Hall. I mean, my gosh.
I'll tell you, that's wow, what a great memory, the South Dining Hall.
Yeah.
No, I can eat my share of pancakes.
Yeah. Well, Colonel DJ Reyes, thank you very much for being with us and contributing to our veterans program this year.
Thank you so much. Go Irish.
Major Amanda Kipley, United States Air Force, class of 2008. Thanks for joining us for Veterans Day 2021. And
Thanks
when
so
you
much
went
for
to
having me.
Hey, when you went to Notre Dame, was it pretty much determined that you were going to be an Air Force officer?
Yeah, as long as they let me, right? I went to Notre Dame, thankfully, on an Air Force ROTC scholarship, which really enabled me to go there. I had always wanted to be in the Air Force, and was able to kind of accomplish a couple of different lifelong goals of, going to a great school, and also getting to work towards becoming an Air Force officer. And so yeah, I went in on a scholarship and knew that I needed to, work through the program, and luckily it was just a wonderful time.
But now you have a great tradition with your family, a military tradition. Your family goes way back. Does that make it Veterans Day even more important for you on an annual basis?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. My grandfather served in the military. My dad was a career Air Force officer of over 20 years, and that's really how I grew up. So I grew up on bases, grew up moving around, and so it's been a huge piece of my family life. I joke that there's never been a day I haven't been a member of the Air Force, either as a dependent, as an ROTC student, as a law student. I was in a program called an educational delay, and then on active duty reserve and guard. So I'm working my way through all the different statuses you can hold, I think. But obviously that makes Veterans Day in particular extremely special. Just, honoring everybody who served. I mean, I've obviously grown up around so many wonderful veterans, both in my family and also just in our community, and my schools, my parents' friends, mentors. Just obviously it's a really important day to honor everyone who served and their sacrifice.
Now, joined the military 2004 when you went to South Bend for the first time and then graduated in 2008. How do you think that experience differs with some of the older veterans that we've been talking about on this program who went through ROTC at Notre Dame in the 70s and then were in the military in the 70s and 80s? The post 9/11 era veterans really have a much different experience. Do you agree?
I do. And, I think, obviously, fortunately, right, after 9/11, which was, such a terrible day for our country, I think there was a coming together, I think, of a lot of people in terms of pride in our military, pride in our public servants. And I think a lot of us that were in ROTC at the time that I was there really were inspired to serve because of 9/11. We felt called to go, and we were in high school at that time when that happened, and I think all of us knew what we were signing up for, and I think that had a lot of camaraderie around it. Certainly as we moved through the early 2000s, as you can probably remember, there were more questions that started to be raised in terms of the public life about some of the conflicts that we were in as a country, and so certainly that came to the forefront at times in conversations on campus. But I think overwhelmingly, my time on campus was one where there was a lot of support for the military and a lot of support, both from the institution, but also from fellow students. And some of those questions continued to be ones that were asked, in our society at large and in classes and things like that. But really a pretty supportive environment, I would say, in that time frame that I was there doing ROTC, which obviously very fortunate for me compared to some of our older veterans who, obviously were serving in times that were a lot more politically charged, I think, and just a lot harder to be someone wearing the uniform probably.
You say you find it sometimes difficult to comprehend yourself that you are a veteran.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a couple of different things. One, I'm still serving in a capacity, right? And that's so fortunate to have the
Being
total
in the
force
National Guard.
structure.
You
So I still serve in the Iowa National Guard as a JAG, which is wonderful. I get to do that on a part-time basis. And I think, it's really opened my eyes to the total force construct that we learn about. But when you're in it, you realize that the Guard and the reserves are doing great work and really are part of the mission in a very real sense. So there's that aspect of it. And then two, I think the other hard part is just, I guess I still consider myself kind of young, or I like to think of myself as somewhat young, don't we all, right?
Absolutely.
And so it's hard to kind of look back and say, look, I did my active duty time. I separated from active duty, even though I switched into a reserve component, and look back and say, yeah, I too am a veteran. So that can be hard, I think, to wrap your head around, but it's something I'm incredibly proud of. And I've recently had a chance to get involved more with some veterans organizations here in my town in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, get involved with some other women veterans. And that really has been special to me to make those connections. Because when we transition to the civilian world, even if we're still part of the Guard or the Reserve, it can feel a little lonely at first. You lose that sense of camaraderie maybe that you had on active duty. And so having those connections has really been nice to form those bonds and those friendships.
And what about it? Would you be joining things like the American Legion or VFW, or are there so many more different veterans or organizations now? Like you say, it's hard to pinpoint people or easily categorize people as veterans these days.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think for so long, right, we have so many veterans organizations, it can feel like it's hard to choose, right? Am I going to join the VFW? Is that for me? Am I old enough for that? Is that, does that fit? It's tough, I think, sometimes as a young veteran trying to figure out where you fit in all of these organizations. One thing that's really unique here in South Dakota, they built what's called a military alliance here in our town, which really the goal was to bring all these organizations together in one physical space. And it's been a really successful venture where, you see your American Legion, your VFW, your women's veterans organizations all coming together in one space. And I think that co-location helps people like me, kind of learn more about these organizations and start to get a little bit more involved. And so I think we're fortunate here in our town that someone had that great idea.
You know, when we talk about veterans, it's really kind of a small elite group and getting smaller and probably more elite as the years go on with the volunteer army and volunteer military. Do you feel that this is kind of the 1%? Do you feel that you are a very special category, both on a positive and negative side?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the challenges is, I guess, growing up in military communities to now living in a predominantly civilian community, you start to feel like you are that smaller section of society, right, that went and served, and that not everybody always understands that. People are great, obviously, in saying, thank you for your service, or um, being thankful, but at the same time, I think the difficulty is kind of that awareness that people are still around the world serving, right? Obviously in the past months, I served in Afghanistan back in 2013, 2014 timeframe. And these past months, obviously, Afghanistan's been in the news a lot. And I think, obviously people are reminded that we still had service members over there all of a sudden, but my perception living daily life in the civilian community for a number of years prior to that was that sometimes it was really easy for everybody to forget that we still had, men and women going over there, young men and women, right? As we saw so tragically just a couple months ago, 18, 19, 20-year-old men and women going over and seeing their country in a dangerous environment. And so I think sometimes that's lost on people. And I hope that, days like Veterans Day serve to be a sobering reminder, right? And just a day of awareness raising that there are young men and women still serving in lots of different areas of the country and across the globe.
How does this all fit into your appreciation of the motto on the Basilica door, God, Country, Notre Dame?
Right. I think that those words, right, are very much alive and present in my own life and in my home. That's where, right in front of that door, was where I commissioned. My dad, who was a veteran, gave me my commissioning oath in front of that door. Walked out of that door on my wedding day, and those words are actually right near the mantle in my house. We have these beautiful blocks that say God, Country, Notre Dame. And I think it's really the foundation for my life and my family life. God, obviously, we're Catholic, my husband and I, and we're so thankful for the religious education we received at Notre Dame. And our faith obviously is such a huge part of our life, and faith really carries us through difficult times. I remember when I was deployed, I can very, very vividly see myself in the chapel there, praying and, praying for those around me, praying for safety, that faith that just grounds us, right, and carries us through our life. And then obviously country, which was a value that I grew up with, and that I hope that I'm showing, my own daughters through my service and through the service of those around us, that, serving our country in whatever way we can, right? Not all of us are able to serve in the military, but doing something to make our communities, to make our country a better place, to make us safer.
Well, Major Amanda Kipley, class of 2008, thank you for representing God, Country, Notre Dame so completely in your life and your career.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it, and happy Veterans Day to everyone.
All right. Happy Veterans Day to you as well. Thank you so much, Amanda.